And I want to take this opportunity to welcome each one of you into the Fireplace discussion conversation this month of March, where we are going to look at the topic on inclusive conservation. And so I would like to acknowledge the presence of IUCN, ESARO office, led by Luther, and Sophie also has joined us together with their team who have been coordinating this. This is a 1.5 hour, 90 minutes discussion, and it's going to be exciting. We have a panel of seasoned experts who will be breaking down this topic for us, and I know we are going to enjoy it. This is the second session of the Fireplace, and I want to acknowledge each one who's been able to join, and just also to introduce a little bit about the background on inclusive conservation. So today we're going to look at inclusive conservation in terms of breaking down the gaps for equitable and effective environmental stewardship that is going to focus on people and nature. And the discussion will explore on conservation efforts in terms of how we can make them more inclusive by involving the marginalized groups, that is the local communities that are close to the resource, the women, the youth, and also the underrepresented groups to drive more effective and sustainable initiatives. So this discussion is going to help us recognize the need of inclusive conservation, while at the same time looking at the interconnectedness of nature and people, but specifically emphasizing that conservation success depends not only on protecting ecosystems, but also respecting and empowering the people who depend on them. And of course, our speakers also will look at the current conservation models in terms of how they are inclusive, and they will also identify to us where the gaps are, so that we are able to look at the dynamics and the shifts that are taking place within the African continent. So it will therefore also acknowledge that the marginalized group possess invaluable traditional knowledge, cultural insights, and at the same time also provide environmental stewardship that is crucial for the long-term success of conservation outcomes. And so the expected outcomes of today's discussion are 4 of them. I will run you quickly. One is identification of practical strategies for making conservation efforts more inclusive. The second one is all the speakers will highlight successful case studies where inclusivity has enhanced conservation outcomes. And then thirdly, we will be able to pick up recommendations for policy frameworks that integrate inclusive approaches to environmental stewardship. And then finally, we look at a clearer understanding of how different sectors, government, civil society, private sector can collaborate to ensure equity in conservation efforts. And so to help us unpack this, I have a team of well-seasoned experts. With us, we have Malidadi Langa, we have Bako Mosai, we also have Alisa Ofula, and then Mutiso Diliwayo, and then Vogani Mariga. One of them will have 7 minutes to do their presentation, and I would want us to get started by inviting Malidadi Langa to speak to us. Malidadi is the chairperson of the Alliance for Indigenous People and Local Communities for Conservation Africa. He's seasoned and experienced in advocating for indigenous rights and traditional ecological knowledge, and leads efforts in strengthening community-based conservation. So without wasting a lot of time, I would like to invite Malidadi to come and speak to us. Malidadi, you have the floor. Can you unmute, Malidadi? We can't hear you.
Yes. Sorry, I was muted. You can hear me now, eh?
Yes, we can. You can proceed.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone present here. It's a pleasure for me to join this discussion, the Fireplace, on inclusive conservation. What I'll be sharing are perspectives from the community side, particularly as looked at from the perspective of AICA, the Alliance for Indigenous Peoples and Local Communities for Conservation in Africa. AICA was born out of the APAC process, and our strategic objectives are aligned to the Kigali call to action. Now, when it comes to issues of traditional ecological knowledge, when it comes to issues of traditional ecological knowledge, how best can we integrate it in modern day conservation? I think the way we look at it from our side as AICA is that first of all, the most important thing is to recognize land rights, and on top of land rights, the other rights, resource rights that come with the land, because our indigenous traditional knowledge is practiced on this land, across these landscapes. So first of all, the people must have the freedom, or must have rights to the land and then the resources on it, in order for them to practice their traditional knowledge and the customs as it relates to the land and the conservation. So that is the one important thing. And the traditional knowledge is important to conservation because communities, IPLCs, have conserved this land and their resources for a long, long time, and mostly based on the utility value of land, whether it's for medicine, for food, for cultural, religious practices. So this has been the basis how they have contributed to conservation of the natural resources. Now, the other thing that we have to look at is the recognition of traditional ecological knowledge as a varied science. I think what we have is a situation where, due to our dark colonial past, traditional knowledge has been is not recognized, in short. So as such, conservation practice is dominated by Eurocentric scientific knowledge. So if something is not recognized, chances are nothing will be done about it. So that has been one problem, and we have to, if we want to truly integrate traditional knowledge into conservation as we know it today, then we also need to recognize traditional knowledge as a varied science. So that is important. What we see happening is that most of the time, our scientists, ecologists, biologists, they resort to traditional knowledge only when they want to validate it against the Eurocentric science as we know it. But it should be recognized in its own light. Then you also have the issue of modernization. Sometimes people conceive modernization in a manner that negates our traditional knowledge and our traditional values. So you have our youth growing up and looking down upon their traditional cultures, their traditional knowledge and the like. So if we really need to integrate traditional knowledge into modern day conservation, then we have to address these issues around how we interpret modernity and how we can ensure that our urban youth are growing up while also leaning on their traditional values and cultures that have guided their ancestors. So these are some of the issues to look at. And then lastly, on traditional knowledge, maybe I should also talk about integrating. Once we recognize it, we also need to document it because it is lost, it's fast disappearing. We need to document it, and we need to find a way of disseminating it. Why can't we have cartoons based on traditional knowledge? Why can't we have games for our urban youth based on traditional knowledge of conservation and things like that? And then we have it integrated in the curriculum of secondary schools, maybe university, and then accordingly fund it. Then even research programs, if we can have research programs around traditional knowledge and how to mainstream it in conservation, I think that will also add a long way to that. Coming to inclusive conservation, I think the starting point is again the recognition of the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities. Once you recognize their rights, then you also have to come to the second level where you policies or policy and legal frameworks have to incorporate empowerment provisions around the co-management or maybe community-based conservation, so that these IPLCs have legally recognized structures through which they can engage with the conservation process. Otherwise, what we will have is a situation where, as a result of the way conservation is practiced, most of the time IPLCs have been sidelined, and the conservation space is dominated by scientists, mainly ecologists and biologists. And then we have a huge disconnect from what the reality is. The reality is from the people living with the natural resources. So that is one aspect. And then having recognized these structures, and I'm glad Southern Africa has done quite well on that. We have Camp Fire in Zimbabwe, we have conservancies in Namibia, we have CPAs in South Africa. That is one stage, but the next stage is to ensure that these structures, the co-management structures or the governance structures that represents the interests of IPLCs, have the requisite capacity to ensure that they can meaningfully engage with the conservation process or with the business of conservation like CBNRM. So one way of doing that, maybe finally, from the AICA perspective, is that we believe that forming a conservancy is not enough. We need to move a step further. Forming an association, a community association, is not enough. We need to move a step further. What we have come to realize is that these structures are often very fragmented to have any meaningful impact. So if we want to engage IPLCs strategically, we should hope to build a network, coalitions of IPLC organizations, co-management organizations, who can, through which we can then harness the synergy and economies of scale when it comes to doing the business of conservation, engaging on governance issues with the state agencies and other actors like international NGOs who currently dominate the community space. So I think within the 7 minutes, I hope I'm still within my time. I think this is all I can touch on, but I hope if people have questions, then I can elaborate further on some of these aspects during the Q&A session. So thanks very much. Let me stop here.
Thank you very much, Alidadi, for your presentation, which you have touched on the land rights and also the traditional knowledge and where the gaps are. Particularly, you emphasize on disseminating this information to the youth, and then also the challenges that are there in terms of it being recognized in the governance structures and the way the various countries are implementing different approaches, and they are fragmented and they may work in one region but not the other. Thank you so much for that insight in terms of the indigenous knowledge practices and now they are working on and the gaps that are there. I think what we are going to do, we're going to run the speakers first to present, and then we are going to have the Q&A later. But also, if you are here and you've got questions to Malidadi, kindly feel free to use our chats also to post your question there, so we will be looking at it and be able to address it at the appropriate time. The next presenter that I want to invite is Eka Mosa, who is a She's here to provide insight on how inclusive policies can shape at the local, national, international level, and also to promote conservation. In her talk, she's going to look at what are the key policy changes that are needed to ensure conservation initiatives are inclusive and equitably benefit all stakeholders, especially the underrepresented communities, and how government and international bodies can support this. So over to you, so that you can do the presentation. And because I know you'll be leaving after this, I will ask the participants to post their questions on the chat so that at least they are able to respond to them after your presentation. Over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a real honor to be here and addressing this very important topic. So at the outset, I'm from Mauritius, which is an island, and we have some very deep history of how conservation has been quite antithetical, actually, to the goals of inclusion, which I've touched about at the end of my intervention. So I'll be bringing in a slightly different perspective. So I'm part of the Oceans team of IUCN, which really brings a whole new dimension to how being inclusive is critically important. So first of all, when we're talking about creating the systems of change and of inclusion, already there's now actual data and facts that are showing that inequality and exclusion are driving biodiversity loss. So in the latest report by IPBES, it is very clear, it's black and white, that inequality and systems of what is called dominance are really driving biodiversity loss. So 1% of the planet is actually holding the wealth that is required for, so actually like 1% of the global population is actually holding 39% of global wealth. And we see on the news how this is becoming worse, how the discourse around accumulation of wealth is becoming much worse. And this level of hoarding and this kind of consumption is actively driving environmental degradation. And Malidadi very correctly made reference to the fact that we are still operating in a colonial or post-colonial dimension where certain structures, certain legacy structures have to be unpacked because they are really not serving the needs of people and planet. So one of the dimensions that IUCN has been very deliberate in including in its strategy for the next few years is the dimension of what we call the regenerative blue economy. And I'll refer to this to illustrate the point as to how policies can really help to bridge the gap between aspiration and practice, between different groups of people, but also finally start to resolve that dichotomy between livelihood and conservation, which really often lies at the heart of the models of exclusion. So building upon the IPBES report, which actually says that transformative change is blocked by concentration of wealth, prioritization of short-term material gain, and systems that disconnect people from nature. Now, the regenerative blue economy is one of the tools, so to speak, that we hope to use to reverse that trend. What it actually says is what the premise that, first of all, the bulk of global marine biodiversity, the richness of global marine biodiversity is actually in the global south. It is something that is really directly under the custodianship, under the stewardship of local communities, of indigenous people and people from small island developing states who are intricately culturally linked to the oceans. And many of you have been part of the body of work that my colleague Vatsu, who, by the way, sends her regards and apologizes for not being able to join this meeting as she's on a field visit, has been doing to essentially look at the inclusion of what is called locally managed marine areas, as well as really unpacking those relations between local communities and the marine ecosystem. Now, what we have noticed is that over 66% of the ocean is being over 66% of the ocean has already been altered, fundamentally altered by human activity, and a lot of it is very capital intensive, it's very technology intensive. So it's shipping, it's industrial fishing, it's even small scale fishing, but without the necessary mechanisms to make them sustainable. So with that, we realize that we can no longer operate in a do no harm space, but rather we need to move from just merely sustainable blue economy to regenerative blue economy. And this has a very important safety element as well for coastal communities who are literally at the front line of the ocean. So for a long time, there has really been the debate as to whether blue economy should be part of the conservation world. And full disclosure, I'm not a conservationist by heart, but I really believe that securing livelihoods and starting economic transitions is really, really key to be able to actually achieve nature and people positive outcomes. So the kind of policies that are needed are really policies that are oriented towards those transformations. And the first is, first of all, establishing a relationship of trust within our own countries. Very often when we're establishing large projects, when we're establishing large initiatives, we tend to rely on, for example, consultancies, on data that is obtained in a very fragmented way, and sometimes very often not in a way that is secured locally. So that really needs to change. And we really need to be able to start valorizing, producing, and creating our own data and creating exchanges across borders and essentially trusting each other a lot more. The second thing is the financial models and tools and mechanisms that we are using to promote conservation, I think really, really need to focus on making our local communities, our marginalized people, our IPLCs, who are the custodians of knowledge and solutions. We really need to focus on making these communities bankable. At the moment, we hear a lot about blue bonds, about debt for nature swaps, about instruments for impact investing, venture capital. But when we're talking to the people who literally see the ocean every day, first of all, the jargon can be very exclusionary. And secondly, not all of that is really tailored to the realities of different continents. So in the blue economy, we are essentially looking to direct funding towards local communities, towards local people, to bring to the world solutions that will not only create livelihoods and revenue, but also have nature positive outcomes, which feed into the broader body of conservation. But if we're using models that emanate from, let's say, Silicon Valley, which is, for example, like a very venture capital model where you inject a lot of money, but you're also looking to exit that process very quickly, then it's not necessarily going to work for the women who are part of the value chain in that area. So again, this is something that we need to ensure that policy is really grounded in these forms of access, and especially in Africa. Speaking of the African continent, only about 20% of African businesses have access to credit, which is a very low figure for the continent that has the most number of entrepreneurs and change makers. An average credit rates for small and medium enterprises can sometimes exceed more than 25%, which is absolutely prohibitive for people to then consider a nature positive business or enterprise as a pathway towards conservation. So these figures really reflect a system that is structurally tilted towards, against long-term regenerative investment. The third point is, again, Malidadi referred to science. My perspective on science is slightly different in the sense that we we should not, first of all, we should not necessarily really amplify Western science at the expense of traditional ecological knowledge, but also we should recognize that IPLCs and local communities in Africa, in the global south, because of this exposure, because of this cultural link, because of this spiritual link, even I'll say, with the ocean, have the most to offer in terms of blending traditional ecological knowledge, in terms of blending what we see every day and what we intuitively know to be a solution with really hard science. But again, policy needs to intervene. Policy really needs to intervene to make sure that the baseline is there. At the moment, the African continent is contributing less than 5% to global science output. And a couple of days ago, I was meeting with some experts at the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, where we were talking about this new agreement called the BBNJ agreement, the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreement, which essentially looks at oceans beyond the EEZ and territorial waters of countries. And one component of the BBNJ agreement is on marine genetic resources. Now, we all know that the other fundamental link between global south countries is with the actual genetic fabric of nature. And this is no different in the ocean. But at the moment, only 10 countries are submitting patents related to or conducting effective research on these marine genetic resources. And when I questioned this expert, and by the way, I'll drop his name because he's very keen to help democratize science. When I was talking to him, so what's happening to your students who are going back to the continent to set up research labs that will directly benefit communities? He said, first of all, most of them, when they try to go on high-level conferences where the funders are, they do not get a visa. Even if they're highly respected in their field, they do not get a visa. The second thing is when they want to procure equipment, something as simple as beakers and test tubes, they have to go through him because they often don't even get a response from the suppliers. And this was really, really shocking. So there's a huge narrative that needs to be changed. And policymakers need to start emphasizing the importance of global south-led and global south-inspired science that takes into consideration not just extraction, but which really is presented as us putting forward solutions that will help the global climate crisis as well as the global biodiversity crisis and ultimately help us to transform our economies. Now, the final 2 points that I wanted to make, I mentioned
Maybe you could wrap it.
Yes.
I'll wrap it.
Sure. So I mentioned the BBNJ agreement, which is the latest agreement that is currently that was adopted last year. And one of the important aspects of this agreement is that it really emphasizes the importance of indigenous knowledge. So our policymakers, in creating these circles of consultation and engagement, which need to be formalized, need to be able to create that link between international agreement and international agreements, no matter how technical they appear, and local communities that are able to contribute to that. And in closing, I mentioned that I am from Mauritius, and we have a very challenging history where the community of the Chagossians were essentially excised from the Mauritian territory and from the Chagos archipelago, and they were sent to Mauritius and to Seychelles and to the UK from their country, from the Chagos archipelago, and not really allowed to return. So, and there was a marine protected area that was established, which really brought to the fore this kind of tension between rights and tenure and the link with the ocean. And to be able to resolve that, I just want to take the example of how organizations and the Mauritian government and academia has really put in place safe spaces and frameworks that really operate with the FPIC principle that really are ultimately anchored on listening and understanding not just the practical dimension of exclusion, but also the emotional and the justice-based dimensions of inclusion. So hopefully we would be closing that circle by putting in place those different practices, tools, and mechanisms. Apologies, I went a little bit over, but I hope to be able to connect a bit more on these different points.
Thank you so much. I think you had quite a bit. You needed quite a bit of time, but you did quite good in terms of summarizing it and just picked up on a few things. That data is actually not there, so which means that we need to invest on collecting data, and not just collecting data, but collecting data that is relevant to inform also decision making. And then also the point that you mentioned was the issue of a bridging the gap between policies, aspiration, and the people is a challenge. And I think you raised up a big issue about the blue economy, where it's part of consumption. And I think that's a discussion that's happening everywhere across Africa. And then also looked at it from a business perspective and access to credit. And then the issue we agreed with Malitadi on the rights, Kenya, and then the linkage also with the ocean. So thank you so much for your presentation. I just want to remind participants who've just joined in, as Paco was speaking, feel free to put in your comments on the chat. We have them closely. After the presentations are done, we will then do the Q&A session. So next on the program, I would like to invite Mr. Mutiso Diliwayo, who is a conservation practitioner working on the ground, particularly focusing on integrating inclusive practices in their work. And he will be sharing from their experience, the challenges, the successes in advancing equity and inclusive approaches
in my
for
room.
conservation. So I'd like to hand over the mic to Mutiso Diwalo so that he can pick up from there. So welcome, Mutiso.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to you all. My name is Mutiso Diliwayo, as indicated, and I work for an environmental organization called Zimbabwe Environmental Association. So what I'll do is I'll switch off my video because my bandwidth is not the best, but I thought that people should be able to see the face that will be presenting. So I was asked to share my thoughts and perspectives with you regarding the challenges and success that are there in terms of advancing equity and inclusive approaches for conservation with a major focus on communities. So given my background, which is in law and policy, my major focus will be basically looking at how the conservation laws and the policies that are there can promote equity and inclusivity in terms of conservation with a view to benefiting communities. So I came from the premise that argues that laws, policies, and institutional frameworks are very important in terms of empowering communities, one, to participate and benefit from the exploitation of natural resources that are found within their localities, broadly speaking about biodiversity. So when I did an analysis in terms of the laws and policies that are there, looking at the national level and also regional level, when you look at transfrontier conservation areas, the management of protected areas and conservancies, my argument is that for communities to be able to participate effectively, for communities to be able to be empowered, for communities to drive equity and have inclusivity in terms of the conservation process and also the benefit sharing mechanisms and processes, we need laws and policies that are prescriptive. So when you look at legal provision, they can either be implied or explicit. And for me, from my analysis, my argument is that most of these laws are not explicit but implicit. And this now leaves practitioners, governments, and other agencies to now decide how they want to include communities, how they want communities to benefit, and how they want the benefits to be shared equitable. I argue that if these laws are more prescriptive in terms of simply saying a community should be able to benefit certain percentage or should be able to benefit this, then that can help in terms of advancing the goalposts when it comes to inclusivity and equity in conservation with a view to benefiting communities. So I have what I call criteria that can actually be used to make sure that communities participate better, communities get better equity and inclusivity in terms of conservation. So the first thing is to have provisions that are clear regarding community participation. For example, for one to participate effectively, they need access to information. So we need clear provisions that entails communities to really understand in terms of what is happening, what is being generated. And once they are clear with that, they can also now demand the benefits to say, we know that you are getting $100 from this conservation process. Can we also have $20? Or can we also have 70% or whatever arrangement that may be required? Then it also requires communities to be represented in decision-making processes. So when those decisions are they made on their behalf, or are they also participating in the decision-making processes? My view is that they should also be able to participate in the policy and decision-making processes, and also by being represented, by also participating in those institutions. So let's look at the Parks and Wildlife Management Authority in Zimbabwe. Let's look at the board. Are communities there? They are not there. Let's look at the Environmental Management Act in Zimbabwe, for example. Are communities there? They are not. And at times when you look at those transgender conservation agreements, are communities participating? And my argument is that we should move beyond representative democracy, where we say they are being represented by their governments or they are being represented by the private sector. They also need to participate. So they also need a seat at the table. That way we can improve in terms of the outcomes. Then we also need specific provisions for competence by communities to participate in the conservation process. We need to build their skills. We need to do capacity building that enables them to participate effectively in the conservation process. We also need for them to be provided with knowledge and understanding of the conservation process. That way they'll be able to participate more effectively. So I look at participation there, I look at competence. This is critical. Then they also need confidence. How do you build their confidence? How do you have provisions that specifically provide for the confidence of communities to participate in conservation processes? That's why we need the formation of community-based organizations, because one of the arguments that is often given for marginalizing communities from participating in conservation process and deriving benefits is that they are not organized as legal entities. So one of our roles as conservation practitioners should be to register them to exist as legal entities that are now able to engage the state and also the private sector in terms of conservation, in terms of benefits, and in terms of equity and inclusivity. Once we do that, I'm sure then we can be able to get somewhere. So in terms of equity, there are marginalized groups that also need to participate, that also need to, because I'm using the term broad when I say communities, but even within those communities, we know that there are also gendered impacts of conservation. There are also impacts when it comes to youth. So all those should actually be taken into account, and we become more deliberate and more specific in terms of how we provide. Then lastly, it's also possible that even with the best of intentions, violations can happen. Communities may fail to benefit, or some of the conservation process may actually end up infringing on the rights of communities. And I think that's why we have provisions like the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. So one of the key issues is basically to provide access to remedy when those violations have happened. How do you ensure that there's grievance redress mechanisms for the communities? Are these grievance redress mechanisms equitable? Are these accessible to the communities? Are they effective? Or they are just there in name, and when there are problems, communities are unable to access them, and at times they die before those grievances are resolved, or they don't even care because they realize that they're not going to get any redress. So that should actually be critical. Of course, when we have those in place, implementation and enforcement are also still very critical to make sure that this inclusivity and equity that we want is achieved. So I'm not simply saying that once we have those prescriptive provisions, once we have those explicit provision, then everything will, but it is a building block. It is a very important step. Then we still have to look at those issues in terms of implementation and then enforcement. So with the limited time that I have, I thought that for me, those could actually be one of the ways of ensuring that there is equity and inclusivity in conservation with a view to benefiting communities by ensuring that they are able to participate effectively in the decision-making processes. They have access to information. We build their competence. We provide them with confidence. And if we do that, I'm sure we'll be able to achieve equity. Thank you. And we'll be ready to engage in terms of conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mutuso, for that detailed explanation. Something that I just picked from your discussion that I just want to emphasize on is the issue of moving from being represented, moving from a democratic representation to a meaningful, real participation. I think I found that very, very touchy and very important, where it's like communities have delegated their voice to elected people to represent them, and quite often they are not represented. But I also picked on a few issues from your discussion in terms of access to information, because information then would make you be able to have a clear understanding what is it that you are demanding, particularly when it comes to sharing revenues. Thank you so much. Our next presenter, our final presenter is Vukani Mariga from Maringa from South Africa. He will be speaking to us. Mariga works with the government of South Africa, an expert in environmental policy, and offering insights on how inclusive conservation policies can be developed at all levels. He will discuss the role of government in ensuring equitable participation from marginalized community to the most effective and sustainable conservation. And he will also explore more on what governments can do to ensure that conservation policies are inclusive and provide equitable opportunities for marginalized communities. So I'd like to give Vukani the mic so that he can share with us. Welcome, Vukani.
Thank you so much, facilitator, and good afternoon to everyone who's attending the Fireplace this afternoon. My work is going to be easier, as already we have some foundation coming from our colleagues who have just presented now. So it will be easier for me to then lay the ground in terms of the policy framework that government should put in place to ensure that marginalized people benefit from our natural resources, but also that they are included in the management of different areas that we are conserving. Can I get an indication if the presentation is in the correct mode?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay. So thank you so much. I like the introduction from the first speaker about the issues relating to rights, which is very, very critical, particularly when we are working with ILPSCs as well as indigenous communities. And in this instance, I just wanted to just highlight some of the important fundamental rights which comes or stems from the Constitution. So from South African perspective, when we look at the rights, particularly the rights that speaks to environment as well as conservation, it is enshrined in our Constitution, in the Bill of Rights, in our Constitution, which then enables us as the department that is responsible for forestry, environment, as well as fisheries, to then implement the different policies that can also ensure that communities benefit from the areas that they conserve, and also that they are involved in the management of their sites. I'm not going to dwell much on the rights because that has been covered very well. And also The previous speaker spoke about something that is also very critical around having proper institutional framework, which is very prescriptive and which will be directly in terms of how communities should be involved and should be involved in the management of various conservation areas that we have. We had in the previous years, we had a very intensive consultation that was done. It was led by the panel of experts who went to various corners of the country to understand from the people on the ground in terms of how they get affected, and also affected by the policies that we have on conservation, as well as sustainable use of natural resources in South Africa. So they got a lot of information, in particular from various institutions, from various communities in the country, which then necessitated the work that we have done over a long period as well, in terms of the development of the white paper on conservation and sustainable use of South Africa's biodiversity. And when you look at this framework, it actually provides prescriptive framework, as the previous speaker has indicated. Firstly, it looks at promoting conservation of biodiversity, and secondly, it looks at promotion of sustainable use of biodiversity, and which is more important to today discussion is the access to biological or genetic resources and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the utilization of these natural resources. But also lastly, which also speaks directly to what we are talking about today, is the transformation which will then ensure the redress to previously disadvantaged individuals or marginalized individuals, and also provide equality and equitable inclusion within the biodiversity based economy. So this is the policy that provides a framework for us to then be able to say, how do we best include our communities, local communities, or indigenous and local communities in the management of conservation areas. So this is very important, and when the previous speaker spoke about this, and I thought that it's very important for us to then emphasize that, which is very critical. Then also some of the important aspects, particularly when we are looking at protected areas in South Africa, is the National Environmental Management Protected Act, which provides give a provision. In particular, I'll speak about two important things that comes from this act. Number one is the issue around promotion of co-management of protected areas. How do government work together with the communities who either own the land in which we want to have protected areas, or where communities want to have their protected areas, and how we can better manage those protected areas together with those particular communities. So when you look at Section 42 of that particular act, the National Environmental Management Act, provide a specific procedure that needs to be followed for one to have a proper co-management arrangements between government agencies, as well as communities on the ground. Then also in the same act, when you look at Section 57 to Section 59, it also provides and outlines the composition of the boards of the management authorities responsible for conservation in the country, and the kind of procedures that needs to be followed in the appointment of those particular board board members. The previous speaker indicated the issues that in many instances communities are not involved in the structures or management structures responsible for conservation, and this in particular provides for that communities needs to form part of the board of directors of various authorities that we have in the country. Also, what is important, it's not just only policies. You may have policies, but if the policies are not supported by or not having a necessary support structures, you may as well not be able to achieve what you want to achieve with the policies that we have. And in terms of the support structures that we have a number of programs that we have that involve or run by communities themselves, where the government comes in and assists in terms of those particular structures. The first one is the People in Parks program, which is one of the programs that involves the communities on the ground through community property association. I think the previous speaker spoke about this as well, where this is a structured program where we have representatives of communities coming from various provinces. We have 9 provinces in South Africa, so the representation of communities will then come from those particular provinces, and those people that represent the communities in the People and Parks program is the people that get elected on the ground by people on the ground, so they are not superimposed by government. And one of the important aspect that has happened with this particular program, particularly when we look back around 2014, we normally have the People in Parks conferences every 2 years to look at the progress that has been made in terms of involvement of communities, but also to plan for the next couple of years on the key programs that needs to be implemented with and by communities on the ground. And in 2014, there was a decision that was made by the People and Parks conference, where they indicated that they would like communities to be represented in all management authority structures, which also led to the amendment of the act that I've just spoken about, to ensure that that is also aligned with the will of the people on the ground. Then we also have within the same program provincial People and Parks Forum, where at a specific province they have their own discussion, and they also have their own decisions that they take as per province. And the National People and Parks program, then that's where now all the provinces then comes together to come up with different plans, but also to review some of the work that has been done in the past. Then at a local level, we also have what we refer to as park forums, where the people on the ground are involved and are part of the management of different parks at a local level or at a park level. And these are the people that also get to represent the communities at a higher level as they get elected from those particular structures. So we have seen the change over the past few years in terms of how communities on the ground they get represented in different management structures of management authorities in the country. Then also what is also important is the issue around the community of practice. This is some of the work that is currently being spearheaded by South African National Botanical Institute, or SANBI, where we also seek to have different community of practice also, which involves the local communities, where they will then be able to share different lessons learned in terms of the management of different conservation areas, which is also very important. Then also, there was a mention from the previous speaker about the issues around training people on the ground. So as much as you have legislation at a national level or at a provincial level or at a municipality level, you still need to have various support programs which will enable people on the ground to realize the different benefits that they can derive from conserving their own land. And in these instances, we have a number of programs that I will quickly touch on. Because of time, I'm not going to go deep into the discussion. We have the biodiversity or wildlife economy, which seeks to help the communities that wants to get into conservation, and where from government we then assist those particular communities with game donation or animal donation, so that they can be able to manage those in their areas. But it's not only about game donation, it's also about the support programs that will enable them to then manage those particular animals or biodiversity that they will be given, or wildlife that they would have been donated. But also to ensure the ongoing game donation procedure. So this is done as a sort of a kind of a loan, that if one community has been given this number of wildlife, they also, after a specific number of years, they also need to do the same, and that game be donated to other communities as well, which then enable the sustainability of the program in the long run. And then secondly is the infrastructure support programs that will then assist communities. You need to also have, for instance, tourism or ecotourism infrastructure that will enable communities to then get into conservation. You also need infrastructure such as fencing as well, which government then provides support in terms of that. And lastly, in terms of the capacity building of those communities that wants to venture into conservation. Then secondly, it's programs such as bioprospecting programs, where we as government, we assist communities to benefit from access and benefit sharing agreements, particularly where some of the natural products from these communities are being used for commercial use, and ensure that they then get benefits out of those. We had one success story around rooibos tea. It's a very well-known tea in South Africa, where the Khoi and the San communities have been assisted and with the negotiations to get the benefits from the companies that have been utilizing the rooibos plants to make tea, and which has been one of the success story for bioprospecting program. Then we also have other programs such as UNESCO Biosphere Reserve Program, which is a bottom-up approach program that is being used for supporting conservation. So meaning that the people on the ground are the ones who will then initiate this initiative, and the government will then come in and support those particular communities with the establishment, as well as the governance that may be required for them to be able to run with these programs, and which then utilizes what we call demonstration projects. So where we have to indicate the impact that different programs are doing to the community for them to be able to implement sustainable development programs. Then lastly, we have other programs such as stewardship program, where communities would have a specific land that they would like it to be in conservation, where we then sign biodiversity management agreement with them to manage those particular lands, and they also benefit from offering their land for conservation. So these are some of the important programs that one can use, or governments can use, to try and help marginalized communities to realize benefits on the ground when it comes to ensuring that they get the benefit from the use of the natural resources that they've been conserving for a long time, but also generally from managing those sites for ecotourism purposes, where they can directly benefit from those kind of programs. So I think it was very clear that one of the things that we need to be doing to ensure that communities are included on the ground, we have to be deliberate about them benefiting and them being part and parcel of the management of the sites that we have, and that has to be drawn up from the policies that we develop and implement as government. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vogati, for that elaborate presentation on how the government has a policy that brings in community representation right from the election all the way to the participation. You've actually broken it down to areas where communities are participating. I mentioned earlier on that Vogani would be the last presenter, but allow me to correct that. I have a last presenter who will make his presentation, Alisa Ufula. He is a youth leader and activist, a young advocate for environmental sustainability, who will speak to us on the role of the youth in driving change and innovation in conservation. And so Alisa will share with us what role do young people play in shaping the future of conservation, and how young people can be more effectively involved in driving policy changes and sustainable. So the mic is yours, Alisa.
Thank you. It's an honor to be part of this. Just let me share my screen. Just let me know if you can see the screen.
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
We can see.
Okay. So it's an honor to be part of this group to talk about the role of the youth in conservation. And today our main focus is what role do the youth play in shaping conservation, and how can young people be effectively involved in driving policy changes and sustainability initiatives. The first question I want us to ask ourselves is, our climate is changing, so why aren't we? And if we look at this picture, we can see the Minister of Tuvalu, Oceania. Maybe some of us have come across this picture, and we can see him giving a speech in water. But what many may not understand is that where he's standing, there once was land. And he does this to show the impact of climate change, which is not very obvious to many people. And in Africa, what we may not know is that majority of the African population consists of people under the age of 30. In sub-Saharan Africa, to be precise, this is confirmed by the United Nations. 70% of sub-Saharan Africa's population is comprised of people under the age of 30. So globally, Africa has the youngest population. And these statistics really do underscore the significant proportion of young people in Africa, and this highlights both the potential and the necessity of empowering this demographic group to drive the continent's growth and development. So really, climate change and sustainability should be part of the youth agenda. So some of the concerns of the young people are, we're the ones who are inheriting the consequences of climate change, which means that their engagement is highly crucial in creating long-term and lasting solutions, because the youth embody the driving force behind the future societal, economic, and environmental solutions. So that leads to our important questions. Our climate is changing, so why aren't we? And despite acknowledging their importance, there still remains a huge gap between the recognition and actionable engagement. One thing we may not understand is that the youth are key stakeholders, and actively engaging them allows organizations to tap into the young people's unique perspectives, because young people have unique ideas, they're innovative ideas, and their voices matter, and they are very key in shaping lasting strategies. But the gap remains, and what this means basically is that despite their enthusiasm and their willingness to contribute, young people often lack clear strategies, they lack the mentorship, and even platforms such as this to influence policy and drive meaningful change. So this has created, there's a great divide basically between rural youth and urban youth. And this has been caused by factors such as limited access to information and even limited access to opportunities that affect their participation in climate change activities. So another thing we need to ask ourselves is, what makes young people so vital in conservation? Why are the young people needed? And one of the major things we need to look at is innovation and technology, because we live in a very digital age where young people are using technology for various things. We've seen the rise of artificial intelligence. So young people are using technology to create solutions, and that tech savviness is making environmental protection more effective and data-driven. And this aligns with the direction in which the world is taking, which is very important. Another thing is advocacy and awareness. Using platforms, social media platforms, different social media platforms has become one of the most powerful tools in their fight for climate action. We see young activists and movements which have been made to ensure conservation is a global priority. So social media then allows them to mobilize people, to mobilize millions, to even pressure governments and to raise awareness that is needed. And this is possible, and it's done faster than ever before, because if you compare it to older times, it's not the same. Things are happening faster now with the rise of social media. Another thing is community engagement and grassroots actions. We're seeing the rise of many youth-led initiatives that focus on reforestation, cleanup drives, and biodiversity protection. And the ability of the youth to organize local communities and even mobilize themselves allows them to make a tangible impact, and this is very key on conservation efforts. Another thing is policy influence and governance. The youth are increasingly pushing for environmental policies that protect ecosystems and address climate change. Traditionally, this wasn't the case because young people were often excluded from the decision-making tables, but now we're seeing young people demanding for a seat at the table, which is very key in terms of conservation. But with every good thing, there's always a challenge, and young people face different challenges in their conservation efforts. One thing I've come to see is climate anxiety and burnout. And this can come from seeing the scale of environmental destruction, for example, and it can be very overwhelming. And many young conservationists tend to feel powerless and experience burnout from continuous advocacy without seeing immediate results. Another thing is the lack of funding and resources. We see most youth-led conservation initiatives relying on limited funding, and they struggle to access grants or investment opportunities, and without the proper financial support, scaling the projects becomes difficult. So another issue is the digital information gaps. The rural youth in particular face challenges in accessing conservation-related knowledge, opportunities, and networking platforms. The digital divide then makes it harder for them to engage in global conservation efforts. There's also insufficient training and mentorship, because many young people are passionate, but they don't have the technical skills, they don't have the scientific knowledge, or even the mentorship needed to implement their effective solutions. We also have limited policy influence, where young people are often excluded from policy discussions and decision-making processes, and conservation policies are typically shaped by governments, international organizations, and senior experts, leaving youth with little influence. There's also resistance from older generations and some institutions, because in some communities, traditional land use practices, for example, conflict with conservation efforts. So young people advocating for change may face resistance from elders, from local leaders, or even in some institutions who are reluctant to adapt, and this can cause challenges. So how can young people be more effectively involved? One is engaging them involving them in policy engagement, because young people must engage in policy making spaces, whether it's through the councils, environmental advisory boards, or even attending high-level forums like the UN Climate Change Conference, which we've seen recently. There's also collaboration with other stakeholders. As youth, we are stakeholders, but working together with governments, NGOs, and even private sector players can amplify our efforts, because while no action is too small, imagine this: one young person plants trees, which is good, but imagine if a government creates a policy on afforestation that creates a greater impact. Another thing we can do is capacity building and education. We can equip ourselves with the knowledge, the skills needed to drive real change, and environmental education should not be optional. It should be a priority in schools and in universities as well. Some of the success stories we've seen include Wangari Maathai's Green Belt movement, which was a movement that empowered communities to plant trees, to fight deforestation, and to even advocate for environmental rights. Another activist that I have come to love is Greta Thunberg, who is a Swedish activist, and she has a movement called Fridays for Future, and she basically started this by simply skipping school to protest outside Parliament, and now she's using her voice to amplify the problems that we have in the world with regards to climate change and all these issues, and her voice is doing something in the community. A story closer home is Ocean Soul Kenya, which is a youth-led initiative that turns ocean waste into art while promoting marine conservation. So what's our call to action? Today, we should speak up. We should advocate for conservation policies, whether it's on our social media pages or even in our local communities, because our voices matter. The next thing we should do is to take action. We should start or even join sustainability initiatives, whether it's tree planting, waste management, conservation education. All of it does something and it makes a difference. We should also engage policymakers, participating in discussions about environmental laws, pushing for youth representation in decision-making spaces such as this. Another thing we should do is staying informed and collaborating. We should follow key environmental organizations such as UNEP and allow ourselves to stay updated and connect with like-minded individuals. A takeaway: as young people, we have the power, we have the critical mass, and the passion to drive change. Conservation is not just about protecting nature, it's about securing our future. And if we do not act now, who will? Young people are not powerless. We can create solutions, we can challenge the status quo, and we can demand action. So let us rise to the occasion, use our voices, our skills, and our energy to shape a future where conservation is not just an option, but a way of life. I leave you with this: the true measure of an expert's impact is not just in their own work, but how well they prepare the next generation to carry it forward. Yes, that was all I had for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alisa, for that. No wonder you became the last presenter and you really brought up the issues very well. There is another group that is quite often forgotten, yet it is ready to be engaged, ready to be used and involved. So, dear listeners, we've listened to all the participants, and I think all the participants have met the expectations. We've had highlights in terms of what is working and what is not working, and the challenges have also been highlighted for us. We've also heard about the gaps in policy, particularly on inclusivity and equity, and what needs to be done. We need to move from just mere representation to actual representation, and also a clear understanding of how government works from the South African and also from Barker's perspective in terms of how the marine ecosystem is also protected and the challenges that are there, whether the marine ecosystem is part of the conservation agenda or not. So I would like to open up the floor for discussions and comments, and I would request you to put up your hand. I will be able to see your hand on the screen and give you an opportunity, and request you to be very brief. If you're asking a question, kindly direct it to mention who you would like to answer the question. All our speakers are here except Boka, who has had to leave for other urgent matters, but the rest of them are here. And try and keep it as brief as possible so that we are able to. So I'm checking to see whether there is any hand up or reaction. Or even if you have a comment, feel free also to share that with us. I am checking on the chat. There's no question on the chat, but comments on excellent presentations. Wonderful presentation, and also a request for the sharing of the recording. The meeting is recorded, and I think you're going to get a recording after this. There is a question from Jubet. My question is for Lisa. Thank you for the very insightful presentation. When institutions aim to invest in youth, securing their commitment and ensuring accountability are crucial steps. How can we work to get the youth commitment? So, Lisa, you can ask that question. I can also see Luther's hand is up. I would like to give Luther an opportunity to speak, and then after that, Lisa, I'll come to you so that you can address the question. Over to you, Luther. Sorry, we can't hear you. Luther, you are... As we wait for Luke to be able to unmute himself and speak, could you respond to that question? What are the commitments that we need from the youth in order for those steps to be accomplished?
I think the first thing one can do is working with already created initiatives, because we have many youth-led initiatives. Reaching out to specific initiatives and working with them can create a sense of accountability and commitment, because the youth are there, the youth are ready to work, the youth are ready to be part of these conservation efforts. They just need the spaces to be part of the policy changes and all that. So I think the first step one should take ideally is to maybe reach out to initiatives that are already carrying out these activities and engaging them, inviting them to forums such as this, giving them opportunities to speak, allowing them to learn, ask questions and all that. It gives them the opportunity to learn and grow, and you also learn and grow from them because they have amazing insights. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lisha, for that response. I'm actually a product of a young person who was mentored and brought into this space, and I totally agree with you. We need to create more opportunities for young people to be engaged. There is another question that has come from Faith Nataya. The question also is directed to Alisa. You have mentioned what the youth can do. How can elders, those who have been in the space for a while, help the youth in their involvement in the conservation spaces? So I think that's a direct question in terms of how can the elders help the youth get involved in conservation spaces. And then before you answer that, Alisa, I would like to give Vivian an opportunity. I can see her hand is raised up. Over to you, Vivian.
Oh, thank you. Mine is not a question, but more of a comment and an appreciation of the presentations and the presenter, because I remember in one of Alicia's slide, an active way of engaging the youth is to give them platforms to share their work, to advocate for the work they are doing. And I think platforms like this are already doing that. And then we move on from the platforms into action and also working in collaboration with the youth. So I just wanted to say we are already on a good step, and this is just wonderful to see. Thank you very much for expanding the voice to accommodate the youth.
Thank you, Vivian, for applauding the work. Over to you, Alicia, to answer that question. How can elders help young people get involved in conservation spaces?
I'll start with this. A generation without guidance is a wasted opportunity. So getting people in the space is absolutely essential because we get to learn from them. We get to listen to their insights and give our own insights as well. So I think what they could do is offer mentorship, offer guidance, offer spaces such as this to learn and grow and to help other people learn as well. So again, a generation without guidance is a wasted opportunity. So the youth are ready. They just need a seat at the table. They just need a little extra guidance. And real impact requires more than just awareness. It needs action and inclusion. So the youth also need to be included. And I think that's the most important thing.
Thank you very much, Alice, for that. I can see Abel Rahman's hand is up, then that will be followed by Chemehere. Over to you, Abel.
Hello, thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. So first, a big thank you to the organizers for the Fireplace, because I think just organizing this event in itself is a big step forward in terms of getting traction on some of these issues, on all these issues that the presenters have spoken about. For me, it's a real opportunity to learn and understand better what's in play here. So my question, I think, to the first speaker, sorry, I didn't catch the name, but he made a point, or you made a point about how communities have conserved the land and for its utility value for generations. What I'm seeing, so I work in a protected area in Sudan on the Red Sea, a marine protected area. And sometimes what I'm seeing is the new generation are less interested in maintaining the values of these services, the nature-based services or the ecological services that these habitats provide. It's a kind of an approach of trying to get rich quickly, trying to harvest as much sea cucumbers so you can get what you need. So how do you see that interplay between the need, for people to quickly make money and less eager to take the more careful approach and cautious approach, and then that issue of conservation. So that's the first question to the first speaker, and then to Mutuso, thank you very much for your insights in terms of laws and policies. And I was wondering if you actually did have something published or written which you captured some of your insights into some of the issues regarding laws and policies and community involvement, indigenous communities and community involvement in management and decision-making regarding protected areas or conservation efforts as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abdel. Over to Achiford.
Can I take the first one?
Yes.
Yeah, I think Abdel, you raised an important point, which is more to do with the poverty and the livelihood pressures vis-a-vis conservation or protected areas. In most African countries, and indeed where I come from, Malawi, our protected areas tend to be bounded by high-density human settlements. And unfortunately, most of these people are poor. And for my country here, I think the poverty line is around the poverty rate is around 70% if you use the World Bank rate, which is quite severe. So, what drives what we sometimes see as the younger generation not caring about the environment is really the necessity to survive. It emanates from poverty and the livelihood pressures. And because they have no options or very limited economic options, the default is to rely on natural resources. And actually, this is a proven fact that poor people tend to rely heavily on natural resources for their everyday survival. So how do we then get them to effectively engage in conservation? I think there's recently been some more paradigm shift or some sort of thinking around balancing investment in nature as well as in human well-being. So some experiments have started to emerge. So what is needed is we try to balance the investments inside the protected area with investments outside the protected area in human well-being. If we do that, the hypothesis is that the negative pressures on our conserved resources is going to reduce, and we're going to have some more nature positive impacts. This is how I see it, and I can quote some statistics. In Malawi, there was a study analyzing the data of wildlife crimes. What was revealed was that up to 70% of the people who were arrested and prosecuted for various infractions, 70% were found to be really for basic human survival. Maybe firewood, maybe seeking to harvest some mushrooms, maybe chasing a rabbit for meat and protein. So with this type of data, you tend to believe in the power of balanced investments so that you can have true impacts on both nature and people. Thank you.
Maybe I
Thank you,
can.
Malitadi, for that response. Yeah, there's another one on the chat.
Okay.
Have you seen it? Yeah, just a minute. I wanted Malitadi to finish the one on the chat, then we'll come to you.
Let me see.
The one on the chat is by Oli Dublin. I'll read it to you. It's about representation. And quite often when representation is
about
the issue of one person speaking on behalf of millions. Yes, you take that one also.
That about tokenism. There I can quote a real example. That's where AICA, the Pan-African IPLC body, is coming from. And then in the Southern Africa region, we have the Community Leaders Network. What we're trying to do is to really galvanize the voices of the people on the basis of representativeness, so that if you look at a people's network on IPLC network, it should have its roots in the community through democratically elected leadership, who then can aggregate at national level into a national network, and then you have a regional network and you have a continental network. If you have that type of structure, you can rest assured that the person speaking is representing their legitimate constituency. So I think this is one way we can deal with that. It's more of a governance issue, and we are trying to tackle it head on by ensuring that we build coalitions of co-management organizations, of IPLC organizations, so that we can exploit the synergies and the economies of scale in the process of advocacy and the programming. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to give Mutuso the opportunity to respond to the question that has been asked, whether he has any implications.
Thank you very much. I think it was Abdel, who asked there in terms of the availability of my writings on this subject matter. Yes, they are available, and I'll share with the organizers. And probably just to emphasize that I think my argument is a very simple one, to say if they become prescriptive, because at the moment it's discretionary. It now becomes discretionary to say who wants to bring on board communities and who don't want to bring on board communities. But if it becomes explicit, then communities now have a recourse to say, if they've not been involved, let's say by a parks manager, then they can say, this is what the law says. Then they can use that, even if it means litigating, going to the courts to challenge, say, we are not getting these benefits or we are not participating. But if it is discretionary, then they don't have anything to sort of base their arguments on, or a basis for them to demand for participation or for access to benefits. But if it is in law, then it gives them something that they can hang on to say, look, this is what the law says, and you failed to do that as the parks manager or as the Department of National Parks, and we are now demanding. Then if it is provided in law, it becomes a right rather than something that is given out of discretion. Thank you. So I'll share the materials. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know our time is long spent, but there was one last request by Achiford. Achiford, are you there? I will give you the last opportunity. You did the last
yes.
This one to speak. Yeah, please go.
Yes, sure. Yes, sure. Thank you. Mine was just a follow-up on Alisa. I appreciate what she presented, and also coming from a organization that works with youth. I think there was an important question which was raised: how can elders accommodate youth in conservation programs? I think now you all agree with me that there's been a shift, a robust, dynamic shift in terms of the advancements that are happening or coming with technology. So I think one of the prerequisites is just making the environment conducive. Let youth be youth and let them explore. Of course, I know there are certain issues or activities that might have been worked, or that might have worked 50 or 40 years ago in terms of conservation, and still they're still applicable in this present time. But if you let a youth be youth and let them innovate, come up with new ideas, embrace technology, embrace digitalization, and also now we have artificial intelligence, which is a field yet to be fully explored. So if you allow young people with the necessary policy support and also making the environment more conducive and let them be youth and come up with the solutions, I think it might also be a win-win situation that would give them be more active and more supportive in conservation efforts. I thank you.
Much for good summary remarks. Thank you all for your participation. I would just like to summarize a few elements that I've picked from the discussion in terms of why inclusivity matters in conservation. One of the reasons that has come out very strongly is that inclusivity enhances legitimacy and trust, and it's able to bring various stakeholders to participate in conservation work. The second one is the issue of leveraging on traditional knowledge, particularly on ecological decisions and involvement. It's that came up very well from Malitadi's presentation. That is very, very important in terms of integrating so that they feel that the scientific approach is not taking over the traditional knowledge. And then the other takeaway is the issue of ensuring fair and equitable benefits through the way we make our laws and creating employment opportunities, and how we can improve livelihoods That also came out very clearly in Parker's also presentation, particularly in job opportunities and access to finances. The other one that I picked up is the issue of justice and human rights, particularly with issues with respect to land tenure rights and cultural identity and the governance structure, where we need to move from representation to more engagement and meaningful participation. And then the other takeaway from the discussion is the role that the youth also can play. The youth are saying they are the largest generation in the sub-Saharan Africa, and got the statistics correct. It's over 70% of youth in sub-Saharan, 70% of the population in sub-Saharan is actually youth. And so therefore they are ready to be engaged, to be involved. And I know there is quite a lot that I may not have captured, but also the practical examples are also nice takeaways. What are the practical steps that we can pursue in terms of inclusivity? I think there is the issue of we need to review more of our policies and legal framework to make it more easier for the stakeholders that feel they are not involved to be involved, particularly at the planning and decision-making level. There is also a need to review the governance model. From Malidadi, we heard about the structures that would not only have one person speak on behalf of many, but those structures would then empower the person speaking to kind of articulate what the majority have actually agreed on. So a more community-led conservation initiatives where local people are directly involved is part of that governance structure. Then there is need to start building capacity and empowerment, particularly at technical level, so that the youth and the IPLCs can also participate in the planning and also the decision making. And then finally, there was the need for inclusive conservation financing that Baka spoke about. So with those concluding remarks, I would therefore like to thank everyone for finding time to join the second edition of the Fireplace discussion, and really thank the speakers for taking time to do the presentation and also sharing with us what they have. A big thank you to Malidadi, thank you to Vogani, thank you to Mutuso, thank you to Alisa, and also a big thank you to Baka for the wonderful presentation. Thank you all for your insights. Let's keep this discussion ongoing by engaging even beyond this particular session, and share your ideas. If there are any reports, I think it would be good for us to share them from moving forward, as we look forward for the next edition of the Fireplace, which you will be notified. I would like to check with IUCN whether there are any announcements that you have. If there are no announcements.
So there are no announcements. We just want to thank everyone for sparing the time to join. Thank you, Steve.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So thank you, everyone, for your commitment. To have 40 people stay up to the end is no mean achievement. We really thank you so much. So,
thank you, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
The next one.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye.